The neighborhood had always been quiet, predictable, and almost overly controlled. Every lawn looked nearly identical, every fence was the same height, and even the seasonal decorations seemed to follow an unspoken pattern. Living under a strict HOA meant that small freedoms came with large rulebooks, but the homeowner had never minded much. After years of staying compliant, paying dues, and maintaining the yard perfectly, the house became a part of the landscape, nothing too unique, nothing too out of line. But time slowly aged the property, peeling paint and fading fixtures making the house feel tired. So after months of saving and planning, the homeowner finally decided it was time for a fresh, clean renovation that would bring new life back to the place they had lived in for so long. The renovation wasn't dramatic or outlandish. It was simple but elegant: a new porch railing, upgraded lighting, restored trim work, and improved landscaping that made the home look modern and clean. Professional contractors completed the work, following all safety guidelines and ensuring everything blended naturally with the home's original design. Neighbors admired the changes. Some even stopped by to compliment how refreshing the house looked compared to the rest of the street. It was the kind of improvement that made people think about fixing up their own properties too. But improvements didn't always sit well with the HOA board, especially one that prided itself on micromanaging even the smallest changes. For days after the final contractor left, a letter appeared taped to the front door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, cold, stiff, and heavy with authority. The homeowner approached it expecting maybe a notice of acknowledgement or even a routine reminder. But upon opening it, the reaction shifted instantly from curiosity to disbelief. The HOA was issuing a massive fine. According to the letter, the homeowner had violated multiple architectural rules, completed unapproved exterior modifications, and disrupted the visual harmony of the community. The fine itself was shockingly large, an amount so unreasonable it almost felt like punishment rather than enforcement. What made it worse was the vague explanation. The letter did not specify exactly which part of the house violated guidelines. It simply accused the homeowner of making changes without approval and demanded immediate payment within 10 days. Confusion quickly spiraled into frustration. The homeowner had checked guidelines multiple times before beginning renovations. Nowhere did it mention that small updates required specific approval. The handbook only referenced major structural changes, expansions, and alterations that changed the home's footprint. The homeowner hadn't touched anything structural, it was purely cosmetic improvement. It felt unfair, targeted, and suspiciously convenient for an HOA known to control aggressively. Word began to spread across the neighborhood. Some residents whispered that the HOA president disliked anyone making improvements unless they went through him personally. Others said the board was tightening rules to collect more money for upcoming projects. None of it was confirmed, but the rumors only deepened the feeling that the fine was not only wrong, it was intentional. Determined not to let the situation escalate without understanding the truth, the homeowner gathered documents, invoices, before and after photos, and the HOA handbook. Night after night, they pored through details, looking for any clause that might prove the HOA right or justify the fine. But instead, the more the homeowner read, the more inconsistencies appeared. The HOA's letter referenced sections that didn't match the handbook. The handbook itself seemed outdated. And some rules contradicted others, suggesting years of sloppy revisions. Then, while searching for old emails, the homeowner found something unexpected, a folder containing archived community documents from previous years. Buried inside was an old revision note, something small, almost easy to overlook, but unmistakably official. It referenced a change made to the architectural review process years earlier. A change that most likely had been forgotten or ignored by the current board. A change that completely altered how the rules applied to cosmetic improvements. As the homeowner read the revision, a slow realization washed over them. The fine wasn't just unfair, it was baseless. The HOA had forgotten its own rule. A rule that exempted the very type of renovation the homeowner had completed. This small, almost invisible detail was powerful enough to dismantle the entire case against them. And the board had no idea it existed. The discovery sent a surge of confidence through the homeowner. The situation that once felt crushing now felt winnable. The fine, the accusations, the pressure, all of it could be overturned using the HOA's own forgotten clause. But it also meant something else. The HOA had likely been issuing invalid fines to others as well, possibly for years. The homeowner knew the next steps were crucial. Evidence needed to be organized, the revision needed to be verified, and the situation needed to be approached carefully. HOAs were known for pushing back, resisting accountability, and doubling down even when wrong. But for the first time since receiving the fine, the homeowner felt not fear, but control. The story was far from over, and the real confrontation hadn't even started. But one thing was now clear: the HOA had made a mistake. A big one. And the detail that could destroy their entire case was now in the hands of the very person they tried to fine. The days leading up to the appeal were a strange mix of quiet tension and growing determination. After discovering the forgotten clause hidden deep within old HOA documents, the homeowner felt the weight of the situation begin to shift. What began as an overwhelming fine, one that threatened both peace and finances, was now turning into a case built on the HOA's own negligence. The realization that the board had forgotten a legally adopted rule felt almost surreal, yet the evidence was clear, dated, and properly documented. But knowing the truth was only the first step. Proving it was another challenge entirely. The homeowner began compiling everything with the precision of someone preparing for a long battle. Photos were sorted, timestamps were verified, contractor invoices were scanned, and even small details like the type of paint used were catalogued. Every shred of information mattered, not because the homeowner wanted a drawn-out conflict but because HOAs rarely admitted fault easily. They relied on fear, compliance, and the assumption that homeowners wouldn't dig deeper than surface-level explanations. The more evidence the homeowner collected, the more cracks appeared in the HOA's case. Sections of the handbook didn't match the fine notice. The violated rules referenced in the letter weren't even part of the updated guidelines. Some sections were missing entirely, suggesting years of sloppy record-keeping. The board structure was clearly built on outdated information, guesswork, and the confidence that nobody would challenge them. Neighbors began to notice something was happening. Small conversations sparked during morning walks, whispered questions asked while passing by, curious glances exchanged from porches. Some residents had once been fined for similar improvements, but they had either paid quietly or given up trying to appeal. Seeing someone actually push back gave them a sense of silent hope. Word spread quickly. This time, the homeowner wasn't backing down. The HOA, however, sensed the challenge rising and responded the only way rigid organizations knew how: by doubling down. Before the homeowner could even send the appeal packet, another letter arrived. This time the tone was harsher, the claims more dramatic. The board insisted that the renovations damaged architectural unity, disrupted neighborhood cohesiveness, and visually altered the block's aesthetic balance. The accusations were vague, subjective, and clearly meant to intimidate. But this time, the letter had no effect. What once would have sparked panic now only confirmed the board's desperation. When the appeal was formally submitted, the board's reaction was almost immediate. They announced a hearing date and circulated an internal reminder emphasizing the importance of preserving HOA authority. This only reinforced what the homeowner already suspected: the board wasn't trying to protect neighborhood standards, they were trying to protect their power. As the hearing day approached, tension settled over the community like an unseen fog. Some neighbors openly supported the homeowner, offering copies of their own fines and letters as reference. Others stayed silent, caught between fear of retaliation and curiosity about whether the board would finally be held accountable. The atmosphere felt heavier with each passing day. The night before the hearing, the homeowner sat at the dining table, reviewing the binder one last time. Every document had been placed carefully, labeled, and backed up. The forgotten clause, highlighted in yellow, its date circled in ink, stood as the centerpiece of the entire case. It wasn't just a technicality, it was a legally adopted rule the HOA had failed to incorporate into newer versions of the handbook. A rule that nullified the fine completely. As dawn arrived, the neighborhood carried an unusual stillness. The hearing would be held in the community center, a room normally used for gatherings and announcements. But today, it would become the setting for a confrontation that could determine the future of the entire HOA. The homeowner entered the room with their binder in hand, feeling a mixture of confidence and unease. The board sat at the front, arranged in strict order as if staging authority. Their faces looked stern, but beneath the surface there was something else, nervousness. They were expecting a simple complaint, not a structured case. Residents quietly filled the back rows, watching with curiosity. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. It had become a question of trust, fairness, and competence. The board opened with their explanation, reading from the handbook, highlighting supposed violations, and stressing the importance of community consistency. But as they spoke, the contradictions in their claims became apparent. Their references didn't match the handbook, and their arguments felt vague and rehearsed. This was the moment everything had been building toward. When the homeowner began their presentation, the room shifted. Calmly, methodically, they laid out each piece of evidence: photos, timestamps, guidelines, contractor certifications. Every item weakened the board's argument. But the turning point came when the homeowner placed the old revision document on the table. The forgotten clause. The board leaned forward, their expressions tightening. The homeowner explained how the clause legally exempted cosmetic improvements from needing approval if done by licensed professionals. It was dated, stamped, and signed by a previous board. The document was official, undeniable, and perfectly aligned with the homeowner's upgrades. The impact was immediate. Conversation stopped. The room went quiet. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, unable to find a response that could explain years of oversight. The forgotten rule wasn't just a minor detail. It was the foundation of the entire conflict. And the homeowner had just placed it in the spotlight forever. Everyone to see. But the real shockwave came when the homeowner presented evidence that several neighbors had been fined for similar improvements over the years, fines that were technically invalid under the same clause. The room shifted again. A quiet tension grew into something sharper, heavier, harder to ignore. The board wasn't just wrong about this one case, they had been wrong for years. By the time the presentation ended, the board looked overwhelmed and unprepared. The residents behind them whispered among themselves, realizing the implications of what they had just witnessed. And as the hearing wrapped up, it became clear that the HOA would be forced into a decision they never wanted to make. The morning of the final hearing had an almost electric tension. The community center was packed beyond expectation. Residents who had once followed the HOA blindly now crowded the back rows, some leaning forward in anticipation, others exchanging quiet, knowing glances. The homeowner entered with calm confidence, carrying the binder that had become the symbol of both truth and resistance. Every eye in the room, from board members to neighbors, was fixed on them. It was no longer just about a fine, it was about fairness, oversight, and accountability in a system that had long relied on authority to suppress questions. The board began by restating their position, reading prepared statements with a practiced sternness. They emphasized the need for uniformity and community standards, attempting to frame the issue as a philosophical matter rather than a procedural one. But as the homeowner began presenting evidence, the room's mood shifted. Photos, invoices, and archived HOA documents were displayed one by one, each piece methodically undermining the board's narrative. Then came the moment that changed everything. The homeowner revealed the forgotten clause, highlighted, dated, and legally binding. Every claim the board had made crumbled immediately under the clarity of the language. The clause stated explicitly that cosmetic improvements executed by licensed professionals required no prior approval unless they altered structural dimensions or property boundaries, precisely the kind of work the homeowner had done. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. One attempted to argue that the clause was obsolete or misinterpreted, but the homeowner countered with the original signatures, timestamps, and the history of official adoption. Another board member tried to redirect attention to supposed aesthetic concerns, but the audience's reaction betrayed the hollow nature of the argument. Murmurs of disbelief and frustration echoed through the room. The homeowner then delivered the final, devastating blow. Evidence of past fines issued to other homeowners for similar cosmetic improvements was presented, fines that, under the same clause, had been just as invalid. The room fell silent. Not only was the homeowner correct, but the board had unknowingly been enforcing illegal fines for years. The implication was massive, the credibility of the board was shaken, its authority questioned, and its governance exposed as inconsistent and poorly documented. The board attempted to regain control, speaking over each other, citing vague rules, and appealing to the idea of precedent to scare residents into compliance. But the strategy failed spectacularly. The evidence was overwhelming, precise, and fully documented. For the first time, residents witnessed the very institution designed to enforce rules falter under its own negligence. A quiet tension settled in the room as the board members realized the inevitable. There was no way to enforce the fine without risking legal exposure or further scrutiny. Faces that had moments ago projected authority now revealed stress, disbelief, and panic. Their control over the situation had been completely eroded by one homeowner's meticulous preparation and discovery of a long-overlooked detail. In the end, the HOA had no choice but to rescind the fine. A formal statement was read aloud, acknowledging the homeowner's compliance and apologizing for the confusion. But the damage had already been done. Residents whispered about past injustices, the tone of neighborhood conversations changed, and questions about board accountability began circulating rapidly. The HOA's reputation, once untouchable, had been fundamentally shaken. The homeowner emerged victorious, not through confrontation, but through preparation, knowledge, and patience. The neighborhood began to shift subtly afterward. Homeowners who had once quietly accepted fines now reviewed their own property files, legal notices, and HOA communication. Conversations about transparency, fairness, and accountability became commonplace, challenging the unchallenged authority of the board. Over the following weeks, the HOA was forced to take corrective measures, rewriting rules, auditing past fines, and implementing better documentation practices. Some board members resigned quietly, while others faced pressure to improve their oversight and rebuild trust. It was a humbling period for the association, one that permanently altered how it interacted with homeowners. For the victorious homeowner, life returned to a sense of normalcy, though nothing quite felt the same. Their house now stood not only as a symbol of aesthetic improvement but also as a symbol of courage, diligence, and standing up against unfair authority. What had begun as a simple cosmetic renovation had blossomed into a story of empowerment, justice, and community awakening. And the lesson resonated far beyond the walls of the community center. Even the most powerful HOA, backed by years of unchallenged authority, can falter when the truth is uncovered, documented, and presented with patience and precision. One overlooked detail had dismantled years of overreach, reshaping the neighborhood's balance and proving that fairness, knowledge, and persistence can overcome the seemingly insurmountable. The story became a quiet legend in the community, retold among neighbors over fences, emails, and informal gatherings, a reminder that authority must always be accountable, and that even small, careful actions can create monumental change. And for the homeowner who had faced the fine, it was proof that diligence, attention to detail, and the courage to challenge injustice could not only restore what was rightfully theirs but also inspire an entire community to question, verify, and reclaim fairness.